Most of the stories that emerged from the Titanic tragedy have long centered on the experiences of the wealthy first-class passengers who survived the horrific event, their voices preserved in newspapers, memoirs, and historical records. Their tales of fine china shattering as the ship groaned, of glittering ballrooms turned to chaos, became the dominant narrative immortalized in history books and romanticized in films. In contrast, the accounts of second and third class passengers, many of whom endured the same terror, the same freezing waters, the same night of unimaginable loss, have often gone unnoticed or were never documented at all. This selective preservation of history left entire groups of passengers erased from the public memory of the disaster. Among those overlooked was a man named Joseph Laroche, the only known black passenger aboard the Titanic. It wasn't until the 1990s that his story was finally brought to light by his daughter, Louise Laroche, revealing a crucial narrative that had long been hidden in the margins of history. The story of Joseph Laroche offers a rare and haunting glimpse into the lives of those who had all been but erased. Born in Haiti in 1886, Joseph grew up in a family that believed fiercely in the power of education. At just 15, he left his island home and traveled across the Atlantic to France, driven by ambition and the dream of building a future far bigger than the one he had been handed. By 1901, he began studying engineering, immersing himself in the rigors of mathematics and mechanics. Those were lonely, grueling years for a young boy in a foreign land, but Joseph endured. After 6 years of relentless work, he received his engineering certificate in 1907, an extraordinary achievement for a young man, but even more so for a black student navigating an overwhelmingly white and deeply prejudiced society. In March of 1908, he married Juliette Lafargue, a white French woman he had met while living in France. Their love defied the conventions of the time, a quiet act of rebellion against the unspoken color lines of European society. Together they built a small, hopeful life and eventually welcomed 2 daughters, Simone and Louise. But beneath the warmth of their young family ran a current of hardship. Racial discrimination barred Joseph from securing the kind of engineering position his credentials merited, and the family struggled to make ends meet. When Juliet endured a complicated pregnancy and gave birth prematurely to Louise, their financial burden deepened. Louise survived, but she was frail, her tiny body beset by medical issues that demanded expensive care. As bills mounted and hope frayed, Joseph began to dream of returning to Haiti, a place where his family's name still carried weight, and where his uncle, President Cincinnatus Leconte, had promised him a stable post as a mathematics professor. By the spring of 1912, the decision was made. Juliet was pregnant again, and the couple agreed that she would not deliver their 3rd child in France, where the cost of medical care had nearly broken them. Haiti represented not just home, but redemption, a place where they could raise their children free from the quiet, grinding humiliation that shadowed their life in France. Their path to this new life would carry them aboard the most dazzling ship the world had ever seen, the RMS Titanic. The Titanic was less a ship than a floating city, a breathtaking monument to human ambition. Its exterior loomed like a steel cathedral over the docks, where the Laroche family boarded on April 10, 1912. The vessel stretched 882.5 feet from bow to stern and 92.5 feet at its widest point, with a sleek black hull that glinted in the pale light. 4 towering funnels rose above its 4 expansive docks, though only 3 were functional, the 4th added purely to impress. Inside the ship was an opulent maze of marble columns, ornate staircases, gilded dining salons, and even luxuries unheard of at sea: a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a Turkish bath. First-class staterooms dripped with grandeur, each one modeled after famous historical styles from Georgian to Italian Renaissance, their plush carpets muffling every footstep. For the Laroches, who were booked in second class, the accommodations were far humbler, yet even they seemed touched by a kind of magic. As the ship pulled away from the French coast, Joseph stood on the deck with Juliet, her belly just beginning to show, and their 2 daughters pressed close against his leg. To the world, they may have seemed invisible, just another quiet family among hundreds, but to Joseph, this moment was monumental. The cold Atlantic wind bit at his face, and he stared out across the endless waters, feeling the weight of all his hopes balanced on this one voyage. This was their turning point. This was the journey that would change everything. For 5 days, the Titanic cut gracefully across the Atlantic, its engines thrumming steadily beneath the decks. Then came the night of April 15, 1912. Just before midnight, the ship struck an iceberg. The collision was deceptively soft. No great crash, no shuddering impact, just a faint grinding jolt that ripped through the decks. But beneath the waterline, steel ripped open like paper. Within a minute, icy seawater began swallowing the lower compartments. At first, few passengers understood the danger, but Joseph did. He felt it in the way the ship tilted ever so slightly, and in the sudden sharpness in the crew's voices as they rushed down the corridors. He woke Juliet gently, whispering for her to dress the girls. Panic began to loom around them, rising like floodwater. The air grew colder, lifeboats were handed out. Somewhere far above, the band played on, their music thin and frantic. Joseph moved quickly. He guided Juliet and their children to the boat deck. Officers shouted over the chaos, "Women and children only." The words carved through him like a blade. He lifted Simone and Louise into Juliet's arms, then wrapped her coat tightly around her, pulling it close around her pregnant belly. She sobbed, shaking her head, begging him to come with them, but he knew. Before the lifeboat was lowered, Joseph stuffed her coat pockets with money and jewelry, his hands shaking only slightly. "You will need this," he said urgently, his eyes locking on hers. "I will find another boat." The deck beneath them tilted a little more, groaning as the ship's great body tore open below. Juliet clutched their daughters, tears streaking down her face. Joseph leaned down, pressing his lips on her forehead, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "God be with you," he whispered. Those were his last words to his family. The lifeboat was lowered into the black freezing Atlantic, carrying Juliet and the children away from the man who had given everything to them. Above, the Titanic's lights flickered and went dark as its enormous body split and slipped beneath the water. Joseph Philippe Le Mercier Laroche vanished into the icy depths. His body never recovered. Hours later, Juliet and her daughters were pulled from the sea by the RMS Carpathia, half frozen but alive. In the weeks that followed, she returned to France carrying the child who would never know his father. Months later, she gave birth to a baby boy and named him Joseph, in honor of the man who had sacrificed his life so that they might live. Joseph Laroche's story is one of love, loss, and quiet heroism. A story nearly erased from history, buried under the glittering myths of the Titanic. But through the voice of his daughter, Louise, and through the fragments of history that survived, his name endures. He was not a footnote. He was a father, a husband, a dreamer, a man who crossed oceans for love, and who in the ship's final moments gave everything he had left to save it.